The planets have aligned and the prophecy has once again came true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast with me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy, the asshole. Woo! And of course, we couldn't do any of this without bestie Stevie Telavivie.
Hi, guys.
Mercifully not wearing his yellow polka dot bikini.
God dang.
This week we'll be discussing power. Why is it so expensive and how is it created? We'll also be discussing Keir Starmer's plan for change and how to make the UK an AI superpower. And finally, why the hell is Oklahoma trying to establish a Bitcoin reserve? We did it, guys. We did it. 1 week and 2 billion downloads later, we supplanted Joe Rogan as the biggest podcasters in the world. Amazing. Well done.
We got to week 2. Whoever thought we'd get that far? And
Yeah.
Feedback's been really nice. I mean, obviously, as I said last week, a lot of tire kickers. Lovely to see family, friends, people that know us, but some outliers as well. So I've been really pleased. And the one thing I've loved so far was listening back to you guys and your fabulous dictation. Diction.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we're rated as explicit.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I'm absolutely blown away. You know, I think the feedback's been great. You know, we're now on every podcast platform on planet Earth pretty much. We've got the first couple hundred downloads in and counting. And we only just started doing the push for it the other day. So we're off and running. We're back here in week 2, coming in hot, ready to go. So just before we get into the first topic today, maybe, Paddy, you just want to remind everybody where they can like and subscribe
Well,
to our
unlike
podcast.
last week, you can now get us on wherever you get podcasts. We're now on Apple, Spotify,
Amazon.
Pocket Cast, Amazon, YouTube. We're everywhere. We're omnipresent like Thanos. We are inevitable.
Yeah.
You can't escape us. But you can also go to the website, which is www.roundtablerethink.com, and you'll be able to link from there straight through to your podcast platform of choice.
And for all of you, and I've probably said this already, but a big ask, could you please go on and can you leave a review? Because that's really important to us, and we're starting out. We need some help.
Yeah.
So
But
please,
only
share,
if it's a good review.
Like, share, subscribe, and leave a review if it's a good one. I thought one of the most amazing things that happened in the last week was just the amount of people who took the time to write long form.
Feedback.
Like, I think we all experienced at least 2 or 3 people each who wrote paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of a long form response to the episode, telling us the things they liked, telling us the things that they thought we could do better on. And of course, that feedback is probably more valuable. The Attaboy stuff is great. It's motivational. But actually the feedback about how you can get better is kind of what you're looking for at the early days of your show here. So we've certainly taken some of that on board. One of the things that was consistent in the feedback is most people said, well, you never covered who you are and why we should listen. And we did that deliberately because, frankly, we don't think we're that interested.
I think you're fascinating. I just think I'm boring.
No, I mean, we deliberately left out the whole, let me tell you about me, how wonderful and accomplished and credentialed we all are. And I don't know. I just don't think it's super interesting for a lot of people. But it turns out we don't know anything because that was probably the most consistent bit of feedback we got. We don't want to spend a lot of time on this in any given episode, but if we do get some time at the end, we might just spend 3 to 5 minutes maximum talking about how do we get to know each other, maybe pick one person to talk about their background. But yeah, we don't want people showing up to hear a long...
Let's just do the 10-second version.
Story.
I'm a pound shop Simon Cowell. You're a pound shop Elon Musk. And who was O.J. Simpson's lawyer?
Stephen's a pound shop Harvey Specter.
Harvey Specter, thank you.
No, who was O.J. Simpson's lawyer?
Was,
Johnny Cochran.
Johnny Cochran. Stephen is a pound shop Johnny Cochran.
I'll take that.
Yeah. Listen, we're all entrepreneurs. We're all business guys. We've all been successful in our careers. And as the podcast unfolds over the coming weeks, everybody will get to know us a little bit better. So maybe that's an incentive to keep listening and keep subscribing.
Let's light the candle on this sucker and get motoring.
Okay, so I think we are going to start this week by talking about power And
Stop right there.
Okay.
We need to introduce the sound effects where the Emperor from Star Wars goes,
Unlimited power. Maybe we get power striked for that one.
Yeah,
Maybe we get
possibly.
copyright striked for even bringing it up. Listen, energy and power is a really serious issue for a lot of people. I think there's some sensitivity in every single household, regardless of income,
Yeah.
to what energy bills have become. And for some people, it's really serious. For some people, it's literally life or death, right? How many pensioners will freeze to death this winter because of where energy costs are? So who better than Stevie Telavivie to unpack energy, power, how it's created, and why it's so bloody expensive? Stephen, tell us.
So I did a bit of a deep dive this week into power. And let's go back to the really basics. You know, we're all feeling it, the three of us, me less so. I live on top of a flat with people that heat me from below.
You get the body heat from the geriatrics below
rising.
and above.
Simple physics saves us all. But power affects us, but it also affects business. And ultimately, we want business to be here. We want to have things made. We want to have construction. We're going to talk about AI, and we're going to talk what a massive power consumer that is. So ultimately, power feeds into everything. Power feeds into inflation. We're all feeling the costs going up.
Yeah.
So let me look at power, first of all, on a really basic level. We are sitting here in Kilbarcon. Thank you, Uncle Paddy, for breakfast this morning. And we sit beside the Whitley's wind farm, the largest wind farm in Europe.
Yeah.
It creates enough power every day to power every house in Glasgow and more. Why are we then paying the most expensive, or one of the most expensive power bills in Europe? And the answer is, of course, simple and complicated at the same time, as it always is.
Yeah.
So where does our power come from? Well, traditionally, it was coal-fired, and obviously huge producer of CO2, greenhouse gases. So last year, we closed down the last coal-fired plant in the UK. So where does it come from now? And the way I like to describe it is, think of a bottle of blended whiskey. So we're talking Johnny Walker, made up of lots and lots of little bits of whiskey from different distilleries. So what are the distilleries that make up a bottle of electricity? Well, it changes all the time. So one of the sites I'm on at the moment is shows you how power is being created at this moment. We're going to pop in the show notes later on a couple of sites you can look at to see where our power is coming from. So at the moment, we're generating 54.3% of our power from gas, 1.3 from solar, 11 from wind, 0.47 from hydroelectric, 3.53 from nuclear, and 2.46. These are all gigawatts.
And is that
from
as we are
biomass.
sitting here right
As
now?
we are
That's a
sitting
live
here,
number.
Live number. I looked at it last night and the numbers were substantially different. Why are they different? Because we have rightly, in many ways, started to invest in renewables. So renewables are fabulous. They're CO2 low, zero. Great place to be, but they're not reliable. So what we have at the moment is a system which can create a lot of power at times, but there's lots of times when the power isn't there. So think about it when you go home, the house is cold, what do? You turn on a switch. That switch at the moment for you will be your central heating boiler. The bigger switch is the gas boilers, the gas stations that produce about 60% of our electricity. What's the problem? Well, the problem is gas is expensive. So we have one challenge. We are buying in gas at an expensive rate. Guess what? We stopped developing the North Sea. We're sitting here on the edge of the North Sea, an expensive place to drill, but still a relatively cheap place when it's your own gas.
Yeah.
The reasons for that, political. The reasons for that, we don't want more CO2. Fully understand. But we still need CO2 emitting power producers in the short term.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've left ourselves very open to the fluctuating price. The next problem, what do? Do you buy it when it's cheap? Do you buy it when it's dear? If you're smart, you buy it when it's cheap. You buy it in the summer. No one wants it. gas prices go down. What do? We've got nowhere to store it. We've got no cupboards that we can put it in. So ultimately, we're having to buy gas when it's dear in the winter. Guess what? It's expensive. So we don't have storage capacity. We need to invest in storage capacities.
Just on that point, Stephen, before you go any further, am I right in saying that last week we were down to less than 5 days worth of gas in the UK in terms of stored gas?
Yeah, I think I read that as well.
We were, but don't forget, it's like water coming in and out of your tank. We're topping up the tank. So the problem with that is only, God forbid, there was a war and supply was cut. That's all we had left. It doesn't matter. Our tank's being filled up every day with new gas coming in.
Right, okay.
But it points to the problem that we don't have enough gas capacity storage.
Sailing pretty close to the wind.
Yeah. So we need to invest in storage if we're going to continue with this model. The other thing is we have these fabulous wind turbines, but with nowhere to store it. So we all know, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in other episodes, battery technology is advancing rapidly, but we're still a long way short of being able to store electricity in a meaningful way. So ultimately, what was interesting last night was you can see gas was up, but wind was down. Today, wind is up slightly, but ultimately we are dependent on what's happening with the wind and it being available at the time that we are busy. So how do we buffer that? Obviously, we invest in either battery technology or we have to invest in something else to cover that shortfall between what we can do by renewables, what we do by gas. And the way that we do that is, I would argue, nuclear. Yeah. And one of my favourite stats, and again, there's no simple answers to anything, but there are some stats that I think are useful. And I was looking at the number of deaths caused by different forms of power. So nuclear is not the safest by way of number of deaths, but it's certainly up there. The biggest killer as far as deaths per terawatt hour.
Wow, there's a metric.
Yeah. Coal. Coal kills about 24.6 people per terawatt hour. Air pollution and mining.
Yeah.
Oil, 18.4. Air pollution and extraction accidents. Natural gas drops dramatically. Still 2.8 per terawatt hour. Biomass, about 4.6. Hydro, 0.02. Nuclear, 0.07.
Yeah.
Is all it kills per terawatt hour. So it's a relatively safe, and these are really the very rare accidents and any natural exposure. So it's an incredibly safe, and it's getting safer. And in fact, it is no doubt a short-term solution if we would grasp that nettle as other people are doing.
What's interesting is, and maybe a lot of people who are listening don't know this, is we don't actually compare notes ahead of time in any depth about what we're going to talk about. So when Stephen's talking, Andy and I are usually hearing this for the first time and just reacting to it live. The thing that's shocking to me about that story is just how little nuclear makes up. I mean, I've got some stats here that I've just Googled while we've been talking. So I think at peak, like 2022, it was 6.1%. You're saying it's 3% right now?
Yeah.
So even though we're not really building any meaningful new nuclear capacity, the existing nuclear capacity is becoming less effective as they slowly mothball plants over years and decades, right? Because of how long it takes to wind these things down. So, and then the other thing that shocks me is just how little fat is in the system. You know, we're only ever producing marginally single-digit percentages more energy than we actually need at any given moment. And it doesn't seem like a very resilient system. It feels like one drop of machine oil in a ship's fresh water supply can kill the whole crew. It just seems like this tiniest thing could tip that over the edge and, you know, send it to a bad place.
I think one of the things that really blew me away about it is, am I right in saying that the only new nuclear power station that we've greenlit in the UK is Hinkley Point C?
That's my understanding, and it's not even ours. That's EF, so we're effectively it's been built by a French company.
By the French.
Yeah.
But check this out. So from regulatory approval and financing in place, it only takes 12 to 15 years to build it. Only 12 to 15 years.
Yeah. And so what we're seeing is a fundamental flaw. And the problem is you can either ignore it, and of course it just pushes out further and further, or you can do something about it. So there's no quick answer to any of these things. The other problems we've got is obviously we've got a very old grid system. So again, I'm not a physics major. I think I got O-level physics, if I remember. But what I do understand is electricity doesn't transfer well. So it will lose capacity over distance.
As it works its way across the transmission lines. Yeah.
So at the moment, our shortfalls and our surpluses, we send across to Norway, Belgium, Denmark, France, Ireland, and the Netherlands. I think are all the people that we are connected to. So at the moment, as we speak, we are sending our excess capacity, which is about 1%. So that's the fat that's on the bones today, 1%. We're sending that across the sea.
And that's why you should have regional pricing, right? I mean, if you take Andy lives next door to this wind farm that you just mentioned. He can see the turbines from his bedroom window. His energy costs, because it's being produced next door, should be super duper low.
Well, that's how it brings on to a really interesting point, because that's Greg Jackson, who's the chief exec of Octopus Energy, one of the largest providers in the country.
Who, by the way, is a deeply impressive guy. If you ever get a chance to go listen to him on YouTube, he's a good listen. You'd think, well, why would I want to go and listen to somebody who runs an energy company?
Yep.
He speaks well. He's entrepreneurial. He's like really business minded. And I actually sense he's got a pretty good heart as well. So he was a surprise to me. I stumbled over him and then found myself really enjoying what he said and then tracking down other things that he'd spoken. He's a real good listen. Well,
what I liked, I mean, I think the jury for me is out on whether regional pricing is fair. Because again, I am a nationalist. I like the idea that we do need to all work together if we're going to solve the problems. But regional pricing is exactly that. It's saying electricity costs here should be about 8p, I think, for a kilowatt. Yeah. Because ultimately that's all it's costing to run
versus
these.
What, 28, 30, something like that? Yeah.
I think I'm 30 pence per kilowatt hour plus your that bloody standing charge thing, which is...
Well, that brings me on to my next point, which is how do they cost electricity? And this is the bit again, and I apologise to listeners in advance. I've realised over the years, if something is complicated, someone's getting fucked.
Yeah.
And the problem is, I don't know about you guys.
It's me.
I struggle to work out how they bill me. And again,
oh my God,
it brings me back to my bottle of whiskey. So we've got this blend in the bottle, hydro, nuclear, and gas. And one of the things about gas also is it's the safety valve. When we hit that moment at night, when we don't have enough electricity and we can't get in fast enough from Norway or anywhere else, we turn on our gas afterburners, the gas substations that pump us up to what we finally need. It's a bit like me coming to your door at 10 o'clock at night and saying, Paddy, can I buy a pint of milk? And you would go, of course, Stephen, it's £47. Freaking hell, Paddy, that's expensive. Well, you can take it or you can leave it.
Yeah.
So we are screwed. We are over a barrel, and at night we have to pay this absurd level. But when I buy my bottle of whiskey, they're not blending out the prices. They're not going, oh, well, it's partly hydro, that's cheap, and it's partly wind. It's only a tiny bit. They're pricing us out effectively at the highest part of the bottle.
Yeah.
So we are paying our prices based on the highest input costs, not the average input cost. So we're getting screwed. So there's got to be some form of regulation. There's not enough competition in the market. Yeah. So Russia, Ukraine saw the gas price spike. It saw all of these wholesalers all collapse overnight. Yeah. There's no internal competition. And therefore we need to find a way either for the government to regulate or more providers to start giving us a fairer price or a power.
So you look at a couple of issues there and you say, right, number one, so 50%, as you're refreshing the National Grid website live, half of our power is being generated by gas just now, 60% of which we import from mainly Norway, but also America, Qatar, and others. You made the point there about where electricity is being produced and where electricity is being used are generally quite far away from each other.
Take London, right? I mean, renewables are on the Kent coast.
Yeah.
But all the usage is in central London. And so you've got to transport it from there up there. And in that transport, you lose
100 miles, 150 miles over the transmission lines.
Because it's inefficient, you lose a ton of the power.
But that makes even more of a case for nuclear, doesn't it? Because you can build nuclear power stations, kind of where the energy is required.
But Andy, it's more basic than that. It's about we need to produce the energy, not buy it in at a markup, right? So even if you wanted to take out, is it nuclear, is it more solar, just move that off the table.
Yeah.
The bottom line is we should be producing here locally 100% of our energy needs.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And not buying it in at a markup from other people.
And if we want to be moving on to, which we're going to talk about later, AI and tech and all the things we want to invest in, it all starts with cheap electricity. If we are paying, and again, I'll look at my figures, but we are one of the most expensive. China, Mexico, Canada, Iran, a fraction of our price. How do we compete with them then? So we're going back to what do we want this country to look like? We want to be world leaders. We want to be world competitors.
Yeah.
We've got to get cheap power.
The lowest energy prices in the world, surprisingly, are Saudi Arabia and Turkey at 5 cents a kilowatt hour.
Horror.
5 cents a kilowatt hour. Ireland, Italy have the most expensive energy prices in Europe. Ireland is 41. This is in dollars and cents, so convert it back. So Ireland's 41 cent a kilowatt hour. Italy's 43 cent a kilowatt hour. I know the Irish story because my wife's Irish and everybody complains in Ireland about the cost of energy. It's to do with the grid and interconnects to the grid, which is very old, are really expensive and really complicated.
Yeah.
And they actually are building a new interconnect with France, but it doesn't come online to 27. So there's some hope for them that it could come down. But because they're an island, small island nation, they are importing most of their energy from
So
other people.
just to wrap up this chat, one of the technological solutions that I looked at in preparation for today was these. Have you heard of these small modular reactors?
Yep.
So these are basically working already on the USS fucking George Washington, that can power an aircraft carrier for 30 years. And there's actually, so China and Russia are the only two countries in the world that actually have working small modular reactors producing power. But Rolls-Royce is 2 years through a 4-year regulatory process. So they're halfway through the process with their design for their small modular reactor. And if that goes through there from regulation and finance, they're only 3 to 5 years. And you could drop one at the Campsie Hills that could power most of Glasgow. And because they're modular in design, they're much more easier to roll out at scale than these gigantic Gen 4 power, nuclear power stations that take, 15 years to build.
Yeah, I mean, nuclear is clean and nuclear is safe by any measure.
Yeah.
And it's obviously the answer, but it's just not going to come quick enough to solve any problems for anybody anytime soon.
And of course, who's building small modular reactors in scale? China.
Yeah.
Them, high temperature gas cooled reactors and pressurized water reactors. So the technology's moved on considerably. There's multiple options, multiple price points. We all listened to the Jimmy Carr on Steve Bartlett, where he said, people sleep beside nuclear reactors on submarines or on ships every day.
Yeah.
The technology's safe.
Yeah.
We could put one of those in every city if we had to.
Yeah.
But nuclear is definitely one of the answers. And last thing, just quickly, I want to say on the carbon emissions, remember that all solutions involve some form of industrial process. So whatever we're going to do, we're going to create carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
The question is, what in the biggest picture, after we take mining, construction, destruction, decommissioning, and recommissioning, what gives you the best net outcome? It's not what's cleanest at the end.
Yeah.
Elon's even said, and of course, he's got one of the biggest solar companies in the world, Solar City. He's got Tesla and battery storage. So there's nobody more invested in that renewables thing than him. And even he said that if he had a big red button on his desk that would just put an end to all fossil fuel burning in the world, he wouldn't use it because it's a transition, right? And we're in the middle of the transition, and that is the right place to go, but we're still a long, long way from getting there. So it'll take a blended approach for the next while, back to Stephen's blended whiskey analogy. And where does drill, baby, drill come into it? Do we have to start producing and extracting more of our own energy in this part of the world rather than buying it? And I know there's always one last thing, but this will be the last thing. People, I think, assume that as time's gone on and we have all these electric cars on the road and our gadgets and our iPads and our iPhones, of the amount of these things have exploded, that we must be using way more energy than we used to in the past. But the answer is we don't. Okay, so energy usage or consumption is measured in a metric called MTOE, million tons of oil equivalent. And so in 1970, we were using 185 million tons of oil equivalent. In 22, which is what we've got the last full numbers for, the million tons of oil equivalent was 143. So we actually use more than 20% less energy today than we did back in 1970. So it's not like demand's doubled and tripled and quadrupled and we've just not built to keep pace with it. We use fucking less today than we did, 50 years ago.
We've taken stuff offline and we haven't worked out how to replace it.
And we can't keep up with it. Yeah. So again, another damning indictment of our ability to solve these big problems in this country. And I will return to that theme when I'm discussing the Keir Starmer plan for change. All right, I think we're pretty heavy on energy there, so we will move on, Stephen. That was a great segment.
Outstanding, mate. Well done.
Andy, over to you with the crypto.
Why the goddamn hell is Oklahoma buying and building a Bitcoin reserve? So this was a story that kind of caught my interest. It was trending on X the other day as one of the big business stories. So let's get into it. Oklahoma is now the first state in America to introduce the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Act, House Bill 1203. Now, this bill mandates that the state buy and hold Bitcoin, and it aims to allocate a portion of states' savings accounts and pension funds mandated to Bitcoin purchases as a hedge against inflation. Now, it was brought forward by Representative Cody Maynard, and he was really emphasizing Bitcoin's decentralized nature, how it can't be manipulated by governments, and he's very concerned and critical of the existing administration about printing away the purchasing power of the dollar. So before we get into this, it really brought a kind of broader question that I think we've all had over the years, because I know we're kind of Bitcoin naysayers here. We've had brief chats about this before. What the hell is Bitcoin? Nobody can agree on what it actually is. So is it a global fiat currency for buying products and goods and services? Is it a store of value akin to some kind of digital gold, or is it just purely a speculative instrument, or as Charlie Munger recently called it, God love him before he died, rat poison? So having went down the rabbit hole in all this, the short answer that I've concluded is it's kind of all three. And so I just want to just quickly go through them one at a time and let you know what I mean by that. So,
and before Andy does that, let me throw out the roundtable rethink safe harbor statement.
Yeah.
This is not financial advice.
Absolutely.
And we have no idea what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Just in case anybody's in any doubt. This is not a financial advice, and you should not go out and speculate or do anything based on anything you hear on this podcast.
And by the way, all of us have portfolios, and I don't think any of us in any of our portfolios have exposure to Bitcoin.
I certainly don't.
May change after today, but we'll see. We'll see
Not
if we can
financial
convince
advice.
you.
Yes. That's my bit. I'm the lawyer in the room.
So let's look at an argument for it being a currency to buy goods and services. So the very first the very first Bitcoin transaction took place on the 22nd of May 2010 when somebody ordered 2 Papa John's pizzas for, wait for it, 10,000 mined Bitcoins, totaling to the grand sum at the time of $41 US. So just to give you a wee bit of perspective, at today's prices, each one of those pizzas would have cost just under $500 million.
So let me ask a question.
I hope you got the stuff.
I don't want to cut across.
Stuffed.
So 2010 to 2025.
Yeah.
What I'm not hearing is, what on earth can I buy today with my Bitcoin? So it's not moved forward.
I'm just about to tell you.
Thank you.
So now, one of the really ironic things, although Bitcoin started its transactional life buying small dollar denominated stuff like pizzas, it almost immediately violently flipped to the other end of the spectrum and was used as an accepted form of purchase for almost exclusively luxury goods. So there are tons of purchases for multi-million-dollar homes, luxury watches, supercars, private jets, high-end jewellery and art and collectibles. So although you can't currently go into your local supermarket and buy your, groceries with Bitcoin, there are actually loads of small value purchases that you can make with Bitcoin. And some of these really surprised me. Did you know that Starbucks worldwide accepts Bitcoin as payment for your coffee? But it's all processed through this third-party payments app called Speedin, SPEDN. Other retailers like Jamba Juice, Baskin Robbins, Caribou Coffee all now accept Bitcoin as payment for products. You can purchase Walmart and Amazon gift cards using your Bitcoin through services like Coinsbee and BitPay. And the one that really struck me, which I think is very practical, is, the commerce exchange guy, CEX. Well, they'll allow you to purchase pre-owned consumer electronics, laptops, iPhones, games consoles using Bitcoin. Importantly, they'll also pay you Bitcoin if you would like for the stuff that you actually sell them. And they do that using their own proprietary crypto app that they've developed. So contrary to popular belief, there are actually vast numbers of products and services that ordinary people can buy using Bitcoin, and that trend is up and to the right.
But sorry, just to jump in there, but it sounds like because they're all facilitated through third parties, it sounds like the third party is taking the Bitcoin, then turning that into a monetary value, and then sending the money to the vendor. Is that fair?
So some of them do peer-to-peer. So you can either swap Bitcoin, just take Bitcoin in and of itself, but a lot of them do a real-time lookup on the fiat exchange at the time, and then they pass it straight out into currency.
Right, okay.
But you can actually, the important thing is you can actually use, if you want Bitcoin to pay for these things.
0.0007 Bitcoin to buy a cappuccino.
Well, again, because one of the things, I had this discussion with my nephews recently, because one of them was saying, well, surely Bitcoin is only used for black market goods, those things which were illegal and didn't want to be traced. And of course, my argument was, no, the whole point with the blockchain is everything is completely traceable. So it's the worst thing to use. So what happens when, and this is maybe out of the remit, but what happens when you move from a Bitcoin, which has a ledger, which you can follow so you know everything that's bought with it, to when you fractionalize it, the ability to track it then becomes next to zero, and the whole purpose of having Bitcoin is then diluted?
No, because everything's recorded on the blockchain, even your fractional 0.007% of a Bitcoin that you traded for an iPhone 13.
Yeah.
Though built into the apps and built into the architecture of the apps is always the accountability back to the ledger. So just to put a wee exclamation mark on that point, Oklahoma also passed, in parallel to this bill, the Bitcoin Freedom Act. Now, this allows state employees to receive their salaries in Bitcoin should they wish, and also allows companies in the state to accept Bitcoin for payments, with the overarching idea behind the whole thing to try and protect state income from inflation by integrating Bitcoin into its kind of daily financial operations. So I think it's a bold move. So before we go on to examine its properties as a store of value, what do we think just more generally about Oklahoma's move here, and also Bitcoin's emerging utility as a currency to transact in for everyday goods and services?
Humongously risky. For one major reason, we are seeing a real revaluation of Bitcoin at the moment, driven by a change of government, a change of policy, largely driven by the tech entrepreneurs who are Bitcoin holders who have invested in Mr. Trump. Would we all be in agreement?
Yeah.
Yep. We have also seen Bitcoin crash, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that it will have those cycles again. Now, currencies tend to rise and crash. We see it with the pound at the moment. But I think, for me, Bitcoin may still be a little too volatile to take your salary in. These are things that should only be directed for high net worth individuals, people that have the ability to to understand the risks and to take the pain if it comes. I think we're getting to a really dangerous place when we let the public take those kind of risks on their salaries.
There's a lot of money flowing in, though. I mean, if BlackRock, so everybody knows BlackRock, right? BlackRock have a $52 billion They're the biggest
Position.
corporate holder of Bitcoin in the world, $52 billion. It makes you worry they know something we don't. And then this was a recent story, a guy called Michael Saylor
Saylor,
at
yeah.
MicroStrategy. He literally went out and borrowed as much money as he could as he could borrow to take a $46 billion Bitcoin position. So there's huge reserves of money flowing. I just wonder how much of that is related to how favorable the Trump administration seems to have been towards Bitcoin.
No, it's absolutely a part of it. And so your point has actually brought me perfectly on to the next thing I want to talk about. So you're really challenging the idea that it is a safe store of value, right?
It's a safe store of value, but it's it's a potentially quite volatile store of value.
So volatility, cool.
Yeah.
So
It was up 125% on the year, by the way. So it was the top performing investment in the world in 2024, up 125. It started the year about 40,000 and finished at 94, something like that.
So let's have a quick look now.
Not
at its
financial advice.
Yeah, not financial advice. None of us currently own Bitcoin. Could
Only
change
thing that's
after
gone up
today.
faster is my waistline.
So I thought we could just quickly examine its properties as a store of value. And to do that properly, you really have to put it through the 5 main logic gates that define if anything is a good or a bad store of value. So these are things like scarcity and predictable supply, decentralization and security, ease of transfer and global accessibility, resistance to seizure and censorship, and historical return in market growth. So let's kick off with scarcity and predictable supply. So we know that enforced by its own code, there can only ever be 21 million Bitcoins.
Yeah.
Ever, right? And so that finite supply stands in quite stark contrast to things like gold, which, while is scarce, we knew mining technologies and discoveries, the gold supply can actually increase over time, albeit generally quite modestly. And with things like equities, which are the things that you would benchmark Bitcoin against as a store of value, companies can issue new shares, dilute existing shareholders out, and they're very susceptible to like bank policies like quantitative easing, which can also inflate asset prices, which complicates the notion of scarcity altogether. And to me, why it matters is that a predictable finite supply of Bitcoin is one of its core appeals and one of the reasons that it is actually likened to a kind of digital gold equivalent. Secondly, decentralization and security. Well, it operates as a decentralized network. We know that. It's thousands of nodes globally that secure the network, verifying transactions. There's no single point of failure. And even though it's often criticized for being janky, old kind of legacy code, it has actually proven to be very safe and very resilient.
Maybe just with something in the horizon there, quantum computing having the potential to unpick the current cryptography that it's based on.
There's also a difference between something like gold, which has a utility value. You make things that's still required for production. What worries me from what you're saying is we believe in Bitcoin, governments but ultimately we're going to see we've already seen it. Lots of other coins are about. What's to say that Bitcoin will ultimately not?
So I'm coming on to that in terms of how it's kind of broken out for the pack. But just to finish these logic gates. So number 3 is ease of transfer and global accessibility. So what do we know about Bitcoin? It can be transferred globally at any time with very low transaction fees, particularly when compared against trying to transfer money abroad in the legacy banking system. I mean, try and send your family in Bangladesh some money. It costs you an absolute fortune using the legacy banking system. And I think a store of value that remains liquid and portable globally can be more versatile, particularly in times of crisis or uncertainty. So I've only got 2 more to get through here. Resistance to seizure and censorship. So self-custodied Bitcoin is relatively difficult to seize if, obviously, you follow the proper security practices, and transactions are censorship resistant. And finally, historical return in market. Bitcoin has absolutely murdered everything else in the last 10 years. So it's average.
The Americans will enjoy that pronunciation of murder.
Murdered. There's been a murder.
It murdered.
So average annualized returns are 77% versus the S&P 500 at 15 and gold at 10%.
Past performance is not a guarantee of future performance.
Past performance is no guarantee of future results. But what would your financial advisor tell you with all these boring funds that you've got? Hold. It's about time in market, not timing the market. So if you apply that same logic to Bitcoin, if you just sat on your hands and done nothing, Bitcoin has a spectacular hockey curve growth in the last 10, 15 years, and it's basically beat everything else into a cocked hat. So I thought that was an interesting story. There's other states that are getting involved now, Ohio, Florida, other states that are setting up their own reserves, and there's actually a couple of small countries that have already building Bitcoin reserves, El Salvador being one of them, and Bhutan, both of which have multi-billion-dollar Bitcoin positions. But I actually think the first big country might actually be the federal government in America, might be the first guys to build out some kind of reserve.
Well, they already have reserves, right? The US government hold about $20 billion in Bitcoin right now.
All of that said, have I convinced you to add Bitcoin to your portfolio?
Andy, the asshole, the crypto king of the Roundtable Rethink podcast.
We'll come on to my distributed network investment another time.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I'm still holding out for Bitcoin.
Can I just finish? Can I just 10 seconds to say what I do think I've made a decent case for there is that Bitcoin does seem to have decorrelated and broken out from the pack, even from things like Ethereum that it used to peg for many, many years. It does seem to be separating itself from everything else. And I do think as it gets heavier and it gets bigger, there will be less volatility, as all things that get bigger tend to go that way.
I'm not sure if you say peg in this program.
It's all right. We're rated explicit. It's fine.
There you go.
All right. Last story, and then we'll wrap it up. So, from our lips to Starmer's ears, a couple of hours after we dropped the podcast last week, Keir Starmer came out and he did a 56-minute press conference called A Plan for Change. It was his plan to turn the UK into an AI superpower. Now, you'll remember last week my rant about where's the UK's foundational model? Where's the UK's big AI companies? They don't exist. 2 hours later, Starmer comes on stage and he does a whole hour on how he's going to turn the UK into an AI superpower. So what I'm going to do is just unpack the things he said, look at the references he provided. I've even done a little bit of journalism. I picked up the phone and talked to a few school teachers about a point he made about education. We'll come back to that. So over the course of the next 15, 20 minutes, we'll discover, is it real? Is it horseshit? Is it partially true? I want it to be true. I mean, for sure, I want the UK to be an AI superpower. So let's unpack what he actually said. So the first thing he did, and I hate it when politicians do this, he came on and he talked about Debbie. Debbie was a stroke victim, and he just spoke to Debbie that morning. Oh, do you not just hate it when fucking politicians do that? So Debbie's a stroke victim, and she was saved by AI. So AI was able to pinpoint within minutes of getting her to the hospital the exact point in her brain where the clot was. And that was one of the references he used to present how AI is revolutionizing the world. He then went on to use AlphaGo as an example. So DeepMind's AlphaGo project. So for people who are unfamiliar with that, this was a Google project back in 2016 where they built an algorithm to learn the ancient Chinese board game of Go. Now, unlike chess, Go has more possible positions and moves than all the atoms in the observable universe.
Yeah.
And it's actually, so unlike chess, which every piece has a limited set of moves, and it's largely mathematical.
Yeah.
Go was considered to be the Everest for AI because it goes more about intuition, feel, creativity, all the things that AI is now really supposed to be able to do. So anyhow, he talks about how Go and AlphaGo, Google's Go algorithm, was able to beat Lee Sedol, who was the world champion at that time. But the problem I've got with both of those things as openers is they're references that are fantastically out of date. Okay? So he's talking about the future of AI and how it's transforming society, but he's using references that are somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, respectively.
Yeah.
We've been doing AI imaging in a medical setting since 2018. It was researched in the early 2010s. It got FDA clearance somewhere around about 17, and it became mainstream practice from 18 onwards. And what that makes me worry about is that he doesn't actually know what he's talking about, and he's surrounded by people who don't actually know what they're talking about. They don't understand the subject matter. Referencing things from 7 or 10 years ago is
like my
breakthroughs that happened last week. You almost said it like it happened last week, right?
It's like when my dad's gigging at 70 years old and you say, Dad, you really need more modern songs in your set. And he goes, I've got Human by the Killers. And I'm like, yeah, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah. He then goes on to talk about some of the use cases for AI in healthcare. And again, from our lips to Starmer's ears, he talks about predictive medicine. Everybody will remember that prediction from the last episode.
Diagnostics.
And he talks about AI's ability to help predict and prevent illness ahead of time with proactive suggestions and interventions before you even get sick. Then he talked about its application in education. So he said that AI could assist lesson planning and can personalize learning for each individual child. So we happen to be quite lucky. We're a family full of school teachers. And I have a friend circle whose wives are largely school teachers.
Yep.
So I picked up the phone last night and I started ringing people. Do you know that there's not a single person who's a school teacher? A, has ever heard of that. B, it's not being discussed in these schools. And C, there is no plan, there is no discussion, there's no roadmap, and there's no timeline. It's not even on anybody's radar to roll anything like that out. So, go ahead,
I'd be a
Stephen.
cynic at this point.
Yep.
I'd hate to burst anyone's bubble, but over time immemorial, when politicians are in trouble, and again, from our show last week, they do fabulous things. America, we're going to the moon. We're going back to the moon next year. We're going to Mars next year. And they've been telling us that for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And every time a politician is in trouble and the economy is looking a little shaky, they tell us about how great things are going to be in the future.
Yeah.
And the only people that have ever solved those problems have been scientists, not politicians.
Which is a great segue, which I will return to in just a second. So he then goes on to talk about, these next two ones are hilarious, right? He goes on to talk about how AI will help councils detect potholes. It will help councils detect potholes earlier and reduce paperwork for social workers.
Oh, my God.
Do we need any help detecting potholes? We've
No.
got two fucking eyes that are great at detecting potholes. What we struggle with
I've got a broken suspension arm that's brilliant at detecting fucking potholes.
is getting anybody from the council to come out and do anything about the
But
potholes
Waze does
we're
that already.
detecting.
Waze is a function where you just push the button. We can all tell the council where they are. It's here. Let's not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And then the last one, and for me, this just sums everything up. So he said, overall, AI will make public services more human by freeing up staff for what really matters. So think about that, right? We have a people-based, largely manual-driven service that we need AI to make more human. I mean, how
It's just
oxymoronic can you get?
And again, sorry to cut in, but since COVID in particular, has anyone been able to find a human in any of the public services? They've gone.
No.
No one answers the phone anymore. So what are they going to do?
Now, he did coin an amazing phrase, which I am absolutely going to use. He talked and presented this idea of, in society going forward, there'll be countries who are AI makers and there'll be countries who are AI takers. That's a great line.
Yeah.
I'm using that one.
Yeah.
I'm nicking that.
That's a
I
good one.
love that line. And so he basically says that some countries will produce groundbreaking AI while others will merely import it. Britain must be an AI maker. So for me, I give him the benefit of the doubt because he's definitely got the right idea. I mean, we absolutely want to be AI makers and we want to be a powerhouse in AI. Sadly, however, I never really heard any ability to
Execute
on the plan. So he goes on to talk about the odd company who's building a data center. You know, somebody's building a data center in the Northeast. I'm sorry, big companies have been building data centers in the UK for 30 years. It's not a new thing.
Yeah.
Okay. He goes on to say that public sector will increase its compute by a factor of 20. Well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean for you? Does that mean they're going from Windows XP to fucking Windows 11?
Does that mean they're adding 15 Raspberry Pis to their...
Do you know what I mean? Like, what does it actually mean for the public? So great that the government's going to increase its compute by 20x. Okay, and that means what for me?
Yeah.
And of course, he never answered that question. So as I get to the end of this, I did think there was definitely a lot of regional bias in this. At the end, it very much sounded like England's plan to become an AI superpower. There wasn't a single mention of Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland anywhere in the plan. He did refer to the Northeast in data center buildings. We would all consider the Northeast to be Newcastle, Leeds, Sunderland. He referred to Liverpool specifically. A company called Kyndryl is building a new tech hub in Liverpool. He talked about investments in the Northwest. We would really think about that. If an English politician is talking about the Northwest, they're talking about Manchester, they're talking about Liverpool, they're talking about the lakes. But there was no mention of Scotland, Wales, or Ireland. So it very much sounded to me like it was England's plan.
Does it not beggar the most obvious question, which is, do we really, starting from so far behind and we no real plan to execute, instead of trying to recreate all this stuff that other people are already so far out into the distance we can't even see them, is it not a question about how we integrate into public services to make them more efficient, the stuff that's already there, the compute and the tech that already exists?
I think, again, and to be absolutely clear, and hopefully this comes across clearly, is that we're not here to bash any one party.
No.
The Tories have been no better at it. No one is. But we come down to that basic thing. What are the conditions that we need to create to allow these industries to do well? And that's not been addressed. It's education. We talked about it last week. Grossly underinvested in. It's about power. Grossly underinvested in. No one's going to build data centers here unless they've got cheap electricity.
Exactly.
Because that's the biggest sucker of electricity.
But Stephen, he goes on to talk that if you want to build a data center, we will move all the regulation out your way. And if you need interconnects to the grid, we will fast track all the applications and move all the red tape out of the way. Here's what I hate about that. So, of course, I love the idea of that in the sense that absolutely.
Getting shit done.
But not only for big companies, how can that be fair, right? Because it already puts people who are a massive advantage, an even bigger advantage against small companies. It can't be the case that if you're prepared to invest X, we just move all the rules and regulation out of the way and fast track everything for you. And sorry, if you don't have $1 billion to invest, then you're subject to all the rules and regulations and your business doesn't go as fast. That doesn't seem fair and equitable. And frankly, it's actually it's a page out of the Trump playbook. Trump's done the same in America, right? If you're prepared to invest $1 billion in the US, I'm going to personally intervene to move all the regulation and red tape out of your way. So what my viewpoint on that is, if you can move it out of the way for a big company, that's probably because it doesn't need to exist in the first place. And so how do you have wholesale reform of the regulations so that all companies of every shape and size can benefit for that? So I hate to use the whole two-tier Keir, but he's almost fallen back into that analogy again. He's trying to create a two-tier system, one for big companies who can invest with promises of personal interventions, and then for everybody else, sorry guys, sucks to be small.
It's also the other point, and I come back to what we said about makers and takers, and great analogy, but I think we've already agreed between us that there's probably not going to be any more big, large language models. You know, we're probably going to get into a world where there's only going to be half a dozen LLMs. So again, what does AI mean? So he's really talking about utilizing the apps that go on with LLMs. So it's a different world. We're not, and that's where politicians say, we're going to Mars.
Yeah.
They've got no idea how to build a rocket. They've no idea how rockets work. They've no idea how the electricity grid works. So they can't talk about AI without getting proper.
We're certainly not going to stand up a lab locally in London to build the next foundational model and wrap it in a Union Jack and then do all our own,
So here's what I never heard in his speech. Here's what was missing. where does the means, financial and cultural, come from to create the conditions where startup businesses, who, let's face it, are actually the guys who make all this innovation?
Yeah.
OpenAI never came. OpenAI was a startup. Microsoft never invented this new wave of AI. It was invented by Elon and Sam Altman in a startup business.
And Microsoft bought them.
And then big companies do what big companies do best. They let startups do the innovation. They wait until they get some proof points, some product market fit. Then they come in, buy it, and then they scale and operationalize that thing.
Yeah.
And so that is a beautiful flywheel that gives startup founders an exit. And I've benefited from that myself. If you think about it, we built an amazing e-commerce platform, scaled it globally, and then a big company came in, acquired it, and they're now operationalizing it and scaling it even bigger. Yep. And so we don't have the conditions here in the UK. We don't have the conditions cultural. There's no VC community like it exists in the States. There's no risk-taking culture in nature like there is in the States. And I think as business owners, we've all been on the sticky end of that one. I only ever needed money from a bank once.
Yeah.
And the answer was no, in 18 years in business. So we don't have the conditions to create them. So the last thing I'll say about this is, once again, I never heard a single commitment, pledge, measurable or otherwise, about when this would show up and what its impact would be. So sadly, as much as I want this to be true, nobody wants this to be more true than me. I think it's a bunch of hand waving, and I don't think it's real.
I think I'm going to come back on a couple of points which I think are to try and balance out. I think we do have areas where there is some degree of entrepreneurialism, some degree of startup cultures. There are some fabulous schemes at universities. Strathclyde University, where I work occasionally, has got the TIC, entrepreneurial. Tom Hunter's got an input there. So we are trying, but there's just still not the wins, the big wins that they need to start that machine. But these are the places that need to be supported. Governments need to assist funding. It's not this bring big companies in to sort out our problems.
There is a reason why the AI industry was born in the States.
Yeah, absolutely.
The capital, culture and environment exists there to support the startups.
You just came up with your topic for next week.
Invent this. So then, last thing, and then I promise I'll stop. So I got so frustrated listening to it because I wanted it to be true and I kind of knew it was never going to happen. And it gets back to a theme that I'll return to over and over again on the podcast, which is, we don't make any of the goods and services that we depend on for our daily life here in this country. So I did a little experiment. I thought, what does my day look like? So I said, right, when I woke up this morning, the first thing I did was I checked my iPhone, a product invented and designed in America. I then pulled on some clothes that were almost exclusively made in Bangladesh, Vietnam, or China. I then reached down and pulled on some Nike shoes that were designed in America and manufactured in Vietnam. I then sat down at my Chinese desk and I turned on my MacBook, which was designed and built in the US. I then opened my email account, which is provided to me by Microsoft, a company started and headquartered in the US. And then I turned on my business suite of software that I use to run my companies, which is Zoho, a suite of software services invented and ran out of India.
But before you done any of that, you also defecated in your toilet twice by this point, which was made in Vietnam.
I then used ChatGPT and Gemini 20 times that day, services invented in the US. I then jumped in my car, which was designed and manufactured in America. And last week it needed tires, which were designed and manufactured in Italy. I then, when I go out into the city, I request an Uber, a service conceived of and headquartered in the States. And then I came home that night and watched some TV on my Hisense Chinese television. And when I'm hungry, I go to my Samsung fridge, invented and designed in South Korea.
So I'm going to give you a
counterpart.
counterpart.
And on and on it goes. And this in a country that invented the modern world. And that's what's so frustrating about
the deep fried Mars bar.
And that was my counterpart, which is, if you take almost every single one of these, and I talk about this when I do my bus tours, almost all of these things, the road, tar macadam, your tyres, Dunlop, Scottish, your engine, Watt, your telephone, Bell, medicine, Fleming. We have invented the world, the internet.
Yeah.
British.
Deep fried Mars bar, Enzo's chippy.
We have invented it all. Where did it go wrong? And that's the bit, So what's sad is we have been and could still be maybe great, but we seem to have lost that ability to make these inventions and then to be able to exploit them. It's the exploitation,
We can finish on a Winston Churchill quote. Of all the great nations, or all the great small nations on the earth, maybe only the ancient Greeks have contributed more to society than the Scots. Quote Winston Churchill.
We'll leave it on that, boys.
All right, that's exactly 1 hour to the dot. We did it. Another episode in the can. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Well, I love the fact that we weren't going to talk about us, but you managed to get in you. A little bit and a very appropriate bit. So it was good to hear. And I am personally looking forward to sharing both of your stories in the weeks to come.
Okay, cool. Very good. All right,
boys.
well, we did it, guys. That's it for another week. We'll be back at this time next week with episode 3 of the Roundtable Rethink podcast.
Remember to watch, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Amazon, Apple, Spotify. Where else, Paddy?
Or go to our website, www.roundtablerethink.com.
Most importantly of all, please share them, write a review, and
If it's good.
Write a review. If it's not good, write a review. We want to hear. Ultimately, we cannot be entrepreneurs without saying we will take the bad feedback along with the good, and we'll always try and make it better if we can.
There you go. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.